What do you do when there is nothing else left? I was a college graduate who, 2 years after collecting my certificate, was still unemployed. There was a gaping blank on my resume. Add to that the fact that my debts were out of control, and it's fair to say I was a mess, and growing ever more desperate. So what was I doing about this? How was I digging myself out of a hole? I was staying up all night trolling through the internet. Is there a point at which the internet does end and sanity begins? I neither knew nor cared. I watched thousands of clips, read conspiracy theories and news reports until they blurred into one stream of hyperbole. I slept fitfully during the day, and went back online the minute I woke up. I would surf, even though I needed to go to the bathroom, until it hurt. I forgot to eat or drink, and soon I had a permanent background headache. Like a lot of addicts, it was not long before I moved on to the harder stuff, the deep web. I was sickened by a lot of what I saw, but still immersed myself more and more. When I stumbled across the site that changed my life, it looked fairly innocuous at first. There was a simple hero image of the outline of a human body, and a drop-down menu in the top right-hand side accessed via 3 short lines. For other people it's one more bet, one more drink. I clicked on one more link. I was surprised to see only 2 options, buyer and seller. I wasn't going to be buying anything real soon, so I followed the Warren Marks seller. This sub-menu left me open-mouthed. It listed items that could be sold and gave the price the seller would receive. All I needed to do was add details for my preferred way to receive payment, then tick the box next to the item. The first item on the list was likeness. For the price shown, I could pay the 2 months I was overdue on my rent, and buy wine and pizza every night for a week with what was left over. Now I was not sure what was meant by likeness. Other items that I could sell via the website were more straightforward. Things like my social security number, my date of birth, even my name. A lot of these seemed like a way to commit fraud for the buyers. All very dubious, but at least, I thought, they were paying to use these details, rather than simply stealing them as so often happened. Likeness seemed more ethereal though. I decided it meant the right to use my image. A photograph of my face. I also decided I really wanted a beer and pizza, and to be able to tell my landlord to get off my back, because I have paid your damn rent. I added my details for the money transfer and ticked the box next to likeness. Press submit. A transaction processing symbol turned into transaction complete. A new box appeared giving me the option to comment. I typed, "Do you need me to send you my photograph?" thinking this would answer my question about what exactly I had just sold. A moment later the reply came. "We already have it." I flashed back to some of the things I had done in front of the computer screen, then decided I would rather not think about it. Feeling nervous, sure I was being scammed, about to kick myself for being so naive, I checked my balance. What do you know? The money was in there. I went back to the good old innocent web and ordered the largest, most overloaded pizza I could think of, then began to add sides. It took 2 weeks for me to blow the money from selling my likeness. I had had a great time, without leaving my apartment, and I had paid no rent. Not to worry, I told myself, and returned to the deep web and my new favorite website. This time, I hovered over fingerprints. 30 seconds considering, flagged a dozen dodgy things this could lead to, but it was the money I would make that made me think, whatever. I ticked and submitted. This time 10 small boxes appeared on screen with an instruction for me to place the ends of my fingers in them. Which I did, and within seconds the transaction was complete, and within minutes I could see that I was once again flush. Problems over. I could pay my rent and enough off a credit card to make that bank back off. In the comment box I typed, "Thank you." The reply was almost immediate, "You are welcome." Now, I don't know if anyone reading this is a gambler. But I guess if they are, they would not by now have put money on me spending the money wisely. And they would be right. This time, I told myself another couple of weeks later, I would get my act in gear. I spent significant time going through the items I could sell and created a spreadsheet with how much I owed, so I knew the amount I needed to earn with this one final sale a part of me. I had decided, you see, that this had to be the last time. There was a relatively small number of things left I could sell, that I was prepared to sell. My name, date of birth, and social security number were still no-goes. I did not want to risk losing the ability to have a bank account and find employment. A history of being a disaster did not mean, in my mind, that I always would be. So, one final sale it was, then clear my debts and find a job. I ticked the box next to sell body part. From the next list, tick kidney. I was close to hyperventilating when I pressed submit. Close to tears not long afterwards, when I checked my balance. I felt a huge pressure being lifted. With this money I could finally get my life back on track. The comment box already had text in it. I had been too worked up to read it, so I took a deep breath and did. It was an 8-digit reference number, an address and the time later that day. An appointment for me to have my kidney removed, I figured. I considered not going. I already had the money, so why bother? Then I thought back to the message telling me they already had my photograph. Whoever ran the website probably knew where I lived as well, or could easily find out. It was not rocket science to work out that they were probably bad people, criminals, some kind of gang. Not people to cross or mess with. I felt sick as I left the apartment at the prospect of having an operation, but also elated at the amazing things lying ahead for me. I just needed to get this over with. The address turned out to be a nondescript building on the outskirts of town. The windows were all shuttered and there was no signage, just a human outline I recognized from the website. The keypad was fixed into the wall next to a sturdy-looking door. Not sure what else to do, I entered my reference number. The door slid open with a sigh. My stomach doing backflips, I stepped inside. I could hear the drone of an air conditioner, but still suddenly felt very hot. Nerves, I told myself. Totally natural. I seemed to be in some kind of reception area, but it was deserted. Scratch that. A man appeared. He was wearing a white overall and mask and safety glasses. He may or may not have been smiling when he said, "Welcome, let's get you prepped." I followed him along the long corridor. The walls were blank, whitewashed, and the smell of antiseptic was growing stronger. Eventually, he turned off into a small windowless room. I hesitated on the threshold. There was a raised table, fluorescent strips overhead. A stack of equipment next to the bed. Medical, I guessed, though I had no idea. "Please," the man said and gestured that I should come in. I smiled weakly and did. He gave me a robe to put on and turned to do something to the equipment while I got changed. I assumed I needed to lie on the table, and when he looked round from whatever it was he had been doing and saw me he said, "Good." Made me feel like a dog rolling over and playing dead, but I kept this to myself. I did though have some questions. "Is this safe?" I asked. "Perfectly," he replied without missing a beat. I wasn't sure. I felt hot to the point where I thought I was going to faint. And the lighting overhead was flickering, making pain start to flower above my eyes. "I'm not sure I want to go ahead with this," I said. "There is nothing to be concerned about," he replied, and, before I realized what was happening, had nicked the skin of my neck with a needle. I immediately felt an unpleasant tingling sensation, and a numbness began to spread up into my face. He picked up a tablet computer that was resting among the equipment, and studied it for a moment before turning back to look at me and asking, "Now, which eye would you like to keep?" "What?" I exclaimed, or tried to, because my lips were numb and the word came out slurred. "What are you talking about?" I managed. "I sold one of my kidneys, not my eyes." I did not wait for an answer. I was horrified and decided I wanted out of there. I tried to sit up, but the numbness had spread to my spine, and then my arms. I was helpless to do anything but lie there, and watch as he once more studied the tablet. "No, no," he said in a quiet, relaxed voice. "The records show that you agreed to sell a body part, but did not specify which one." "I took kidney," I tried to say, but by now my mouth would not move, and I could not feel my tongue. I could feel my heart beating faster and faster, felt like I could not breathe. Cold sweat trickled down into my eyes, blurring my vision. I could see this. I could not feel it. I wanted to scream. Wanted to cry out in terror. But my jaws were locked, my limbs useless. All I could do was watch as the scalpel came into view, and as he lowered it slowly towards my left eye. "It will all be over soon," he said, and then the blade became a shadow over my eye, a darkness that was soon all I could see. That was then. This is now. I am writing this in an internet cafe, after trashing my laptop's hard drive and ditching it. There's just me in here and the owner. I think he would like me to leave from the dirty looks he is giving me. But before I head off, I have one more thing to do. I have enough money to buy a coach ticket and go a long way from here, away from everything and everyone I have ever known. I have just logged onto the site and found what I am looking for in the seller menu. Name, date of birth, social security number. I tick sell on all three, enter the details in the boxes that pop up, press submit, and moments later the money is in my account. I have been withdrawing as much cash I can daily, and after I go across the road to the ATM and withdraw the latest amount, I will snap my card in half and throw it away. Only, the screen has changed, the comment box has opened up, and a new message has appeared. We like and follow you. I feel tears begin to flow from the eye they did not take. I used to be a normal person. I just want to get that out clear first of all. Yeah, I had a few strange hobbies, but when this all started out I was just like your average Joe. One of my strange hobbies was browsing the deep web. It was mostly out of curiosity, let me assure you. I wasn't involved in anything shady and also made sure to take adequate precautions. One day I was just looking at random web pages, when I stumbled upon a curious one. Hello there. Are you perhaps interested in buying other people's souls? I've been collecting people's souls for a very long time, and I have a bit extra. It was one of the most basic web pages that you could imagine, with only an address on where to send the Bitcoin to buy one. I laughed when I saw this. I had seen my share of scams on the deep web, but this one was new. I went to close the window, before something popped up on my screen. Hello there. I see you're browsing my site. My heart nearly froze as I saw it was a chat box. But I was sure the security measures I had taken were sufficient to prevent someone from tracking me or hacking into my computer. How did this pop-up appear out of nowhere then? Relax. I just noticed that you were going to leave without buying anything. It seems you haven't been convinced what I'm selling is real. Why not try a free sample? A simple yes and no dialog box appeared. Now, I should have clicked on no, but in my curiosity, I clicked on yes. A bad decision in hindsight, but I wanted to know where this was going. It's rather hard to explain what possessing a soul is like. You probably think that a soul is immutable or indestructible, in other words. And you'd be right. In that moment I could tell in my head that I held a single soul. But there was a way for me to manifest it in the real world. It appeared as a tiny ball of light no bigger than the smallest bone in your pinky. I reached out to touch it, and a flood of memories entered my head. The soul was of a woman by the name of Alexandra Cortez. She had not had a very happy childhood, and had escaped her home when she turned 16. A few bad decisions involving drugs and she had literally nothing left on her, and was slowly dying. It was here that her memories became less clear. There was a strange shadow that I could see, but nothing clearer than that. Mind you, everything else that I could see had been as clear as if I was the one seeing it. But this figure was covered in what I could only describe as dark smog. She had sold her soul to this thing in exchange for money. The rest of her life was rather good, not fantastic by any means, but it was still decent, and paradise compared to what she had suffered earlier. It all ended one day, when she was walking along a dark street corner and a man ambushed her. She died that night, though not the 4 hours of torture at his hands. There was far more. Of course I had her entire life in my hands, but I only put down the important bits given her whole biography could fill up several books. That wasn't all though. I could hear her thoughts as I held her soul in my hand. She was pleading, begging me to let her go. Now, you're probably wondering what the afterlife is like. I have to confess that I never found out, just that there was something beyond where souls could go to. After listening to her pleadings I agreed to let her go. Much as I said earlier, I can't really explain how I let her go, just that I did. She vanished before me, and the light also went away with her, leaving my mind completely clear. I thought what had happened was just some sort of odd hallucination, or rather, I hoped that that was what it was. I didn't want to believe there was some monster collecting souls around on the internet. That was until 4 days later when I got an anonymous email linking back to that site. Hello there. I hope you enjoyed your free sample. Perhaps you would like to purchase another. We're having a sale now. The mail confirmed for me that it wasn't some weird fever dream, and after a moment's hesitation, I decided to make an actual purchase. I should have realized that something was wrong the moment I saw the prices. They were dirt cheap, which made very little sense given what I learned later on. I got the souls of 3 more women and they were quite similar in many ways. Much like with Alexandra, I couldn't see the entity they sold their souls to properly. The amounts of money they got for their souls were quite staggering. I had barely paid 0.00001% of that price. Again, that should have told me that something was off about this whole thing, but I was rather oblivious to the fact then. What I was more focused on was that they had all died in similar ways, by being ambushed by a man. They never saw his face though, but they had all died in agonizing ways. Letting their souls go free brought a certain peace to my mind. Kind of like animal rights activists who buy animals intended for slaughter and then release them, I guess. Except I was releasing these human souls from damnation. I highly doubted that whatever entity bought them in the first place was kind to them. I bought another one a few days afterward, and it was here that things took a dark turn. It was the soul of a man named Christopher. I don't want to share his full name here, but that hadn't even been what I had been concentrating on at the time. No, when I went through the memories of his life, I was sickened by what I saw. This man was a serial killer. Those 4 women I told you about earlier. He was the one who had killed them. He had done it to over 17 more. The mere thought of it made me want to throw up. Again, I couldn't see the figure to whom he sold his soul to. He hadn't done it for money, no, he had been caught by the police, and had exchanged his soul for getting out of jail. Some sort of legal loophole was there because the police didn't document a piece of evidence correctly, and he was let go. And he killed again. And again. 10 more victims before being caught and given the death penalty. Much like those before him, he begged to be released. But no sort of compassion emerged in my mind. I was sickened by what he had done and appalled that he had suffered so little compared to his victims. In my rage, I took hold of his soul and wondered what I could do with it. I could now hear him pleading again in my mind, but I ignored that and lit the stove. I then dropped the small ball of light onto the flame. Oh, he definitely felt that. He couldn't die, but he could feel the flame consume him. I could hear his screams, and though at first I was disgusted with myself, I learned to live with it. This man had no regrets or remorse for what he had done aside from the fact that he was dead. It became a daily routine for me. I would try to find new ways to torment him. I would stick him in my freezer. I would stab his soul with a knife. I even thought about buying acid from somewhere to dip him in, but that would have raised too many questions. I never really considered myself to be a vindictive person. I think it was because I had been so close to some of his victims, and had felt all they felt when they died, that I did what I did. Eventually, I got tired of this after a few weeks and let him go, but in case you're worried, I assure you he suffered 10 times worse than what he had dealt out. I then bought another soul a couple of weeks later. This one belonged to a woman who had killed 3 of her own children. My heart was hardened from before and I went about my way making sure she got what she deserved. It continued like that. Nearly every soul that I bought was some sort of horrible criminal. I didn't get any innocents to release like I did earlier. Soon, my apartment had over 24 of them. I spent nearly every free waking hour tormenting them as much as I could. It was more addicting than anything I had ever tried before. Eventually, I ran into a small roadblock, though the prices for the souls increased exponentially. I should add they were worth right about how much they should have been. I had already released a good number and was quite frustrated that I couldn't get my hands on some more. I got an email a few days after that. Hey there champ. Seems that you're a bit short on cash lately, but since you've been such a great customer, I was thinking that you could have a few of them for free. With a few strings attached, of course. I barely even read the conditions as I agreed to it. That was just how much I was hooked. Now, I have over 100 souls. I spend all of my time dealing with them. It's strange, but I don't think I've eaten something in the past few months. I haven't even gone to work, and I thought they'd kick me out of my apartment for non-payment of rent one day, but they haven't. I have noticed a few changes when it comes to my body as well. There are 2 small bumps on the top of my head that won't go away. I've been meaning to go to a doctor, but haven't found the time. My skin has turned a different color as well, and I feel something growing out of my back. But really, I can't be bothered with all of that. A new shipment of souls has come from the website, and I need to get to work on them. I wish I'd never watched that video. I thought I'd grow out of shit like that by the time I'd hit 20. Yet there I was, off my tits on some choice MDMA Jeff hooked us up with. tearing through some kind of hardcore sadomasochism site. The kind of videos you're surprised aren't on the dark web. If you ever stumbled across the Pain Olympics or 4chan, you'll know what I'm talking about. When I was a teenager, mates and I would gather round a PC screen, playing chicken to see who could watch the most extreme content without leaving the room or puking. This was like that, but with a tablet, and nobody is sober. In my defense, it wasn't my idea. Luke's cousin was down for the weekend. Young lad, about 16 I think. Not too bright, but kept himself to himself. Which meant he wasn't going to get us caught sneaking him into the rave underage. As usual, afterwards we found ourselves at a flat party, and then in Luke's bedroom. It wasn't until about 4 am, when those who were able had sauntered off to get laid, that the usual rounds of spliff and internet began. This was when Luke's cousin started suggesting weirder and weirder shit. We all thought at first that it was just a Mandy. He was young after all, and teenage desire to be seen as edgy mixed with calm-down anxiety was a plausible explanation. After a while though, one of us, I was too fucked to remember who, but I hope it wasn't me, started to entertain his suggestions. Everybody there enjoyed horror films after all. We had more than one forum, saw our hostel marathon after a night out. What was the harm? Soon enough we found ourselves at the familiar group cringe, and there was then, of course, the unending debate over whatever macabre footage we just put ourselves through was real. Luke's cousin was in control by that point. We hadn't noticed how quiet he'd gotten. He sat there on the floor, legs crossed, leaning forward every so often to click the next video. Had this look on his face the whole time, like he was searching for something specific. He never skipped anything though. No matter what the video showed, he just sat back, watching whatever it was making the rest of us make melodramatic retching noises unfold. Once one video finished, he scoured the algorithm suggestions for the next. He'd ignored all of ours by this point, so we'd stopped bothering. We were more than a few blunts into our session, and holding our focus on anything other than the rich conversation about which of the girls we knew would be a good smash was difficult. I remember him sighing disappointedly at every video he found, except for the last. When he found that one, he licked his lips, rocking slightly. He must have known. No way the creepy little fuck found it by accident. When he clicked play, we all knew this one was going to be different. I'm not sure how. Call it instinct. Something was off about it, which when you consider the kind of website we were surfing said a lot. Before the footage started, the rest of us had been laughing and joking in a blunt smoked haze. The vibe of the room switched in less than a heartbeat. The moment sound started to seep from the tinny speaker, every chemically stimulated mind enraptured by the figure on the 12-inch tablet screen. It was a girl. Younger than us, but older than Luke's cousin. Pretty, but not in the conventional sense. I say pretty because she wasn't exactly hot. Not the kind of looks you try and buy a drink. She had a pleasantness to the eye that I can't really put in words. To describe her would make her sound plain, almost ugly. Drooping cheeks, large eyes surrounded by makeup done a little too much, lipstick ever so just the wrong shade of red. Hair that had been brushed but was in obvious need of a wash. Not the sort of girl I'd give a second or third look under any other circumstance. In that smoky room she was all I could think about. The first 2 minutes of footage were her staring at the camera in front of a grey wall. The shot was well lit, and the camera was expensive. All the lines and imperfections of her face were visible. Her mic was clearly pricey, too. When she finally parted her lips, the sound of them peeling apart was quite audible. The breaths between her words came through as though she were in the room with us. She talked for a whole 5 minutes, before anything interesting happened. I don't know when the lads had last focused on something for that long at that time in the morning. Maybe never. Luke, Hunt, Jack, Lyle, and I all sat on the mattress in beanbags, hypnotized by the movement of her puffed lips, whispering semi-nonsense at us. She spoke a lot about necessity and excess, about evolution and optimization, deconstruction and renewal. Subjects that didn't really seem to be linked to me at the time. It goes without saying I understand it all now, but then it just came across as meaningless word salad. It didn't matter. I would have listened to that face read even something as dull as the Bible for 500 years if given the chance. She said her last words and held up a potato peeler. I didn't think much of it. I was too lost in those dark eyes of hers. She asked us all to remember that everything we do is to achieve perfection. Something like that, at least. The exact phrasing doesn't matter, it's the idea that counts. Perfection. The room, with the exception of Luke's cousin, jumped in unison when the footage cut to black. The switch was accompanied with a loud crash, the sound of something heavy landing on the lowest notes of a grand piano. You can try this at home. The words appeared letter by letter in a white typewriter font. Sporadic detuned piano notes played over the scrolling text, along with muffled grunts and the scraping bangs of God knows what being dragged across the floor. The hair on my arms stood on end. I wasn't grinning and laughing anymore. I was still high, but barely. From the quick glances I exchanged with the rest of the lads I could tell they were in a similar state. Everybody except Luke's cousin, of course. The camera had been moved about 10 feet away from the woman. For some reason this didn't affect the definition of her face. The wrinkles of her top lip, the poorly concealed spot on her nostril, the blobs left over from over-generous application of eyeliner and mascara, all were just as clear as when she had been a few inches from the screen. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her drooping cheeks were slick with tears, and they wobbled in time with the trembling of her jaw. The large eyes stared into the camera, into us, pleading for help. Both sides of the screen knew wasn't coming. She was still holding the potato peeler next to her head. Unlike her bottom lip, her grip was steady. We could see her clothes now, too. She was wearing a skirted suit. And an expensive one at that. My plan for after uni was to go into banking. I'm versed enough in tailoring to recognize quality fabric when I see it. The sobbing woman had on the uniform of the financially successful. The men stood either side of her were naked. They were each a few feet taller than her. An impressive feat, since even though she was sat down, you could tell the woman was tall. The length of her slender legs was a testament to this. How their stubby legs supported their weight was a mystery to me. The hanging belly flap almost touched the floor. Their skin shone with grease, sweat and dirt. And were it not for the fact I knew it's impossible, I would have sworn under oath that I could smell the pungent odor of curdled milk whenever I looked at either of them for too long. The one to her left was holding a transparent bucket filled with a clear liquid that I hoped was water. To her right was a silver tray. I can't comment on what the men looked like. I couldn't see their faces through the orange shopping bags over their heads. The cheap plastic was fastened in place with about a half-dozen zip ties round each man's neck, the crinkled skin pulled so taut that the shapes of their faces were visible. A pair of orange-bound skulls on the peaks of twin mountains of glistening flesh. The only movement from either was the steady in out of the bag being pushed and pulled by labored breaths. The letters didn't scroll out one by one this time, but appeared as a single block. They only hanged around for about half a second before the video took us back to the dusty floorboards. Grey wool, sobbing girl, and her hulking guardians. Except, she wasn't sobbing anymore. She wasn't smiling either. Even though her gaze was directly into the camera, her expression was blank, still laced with an unexplainable magnetism, but the Perkins spark from the segment where she spoke to us was gone. She raised the potato peeler in front of her face. Before I knew what was happening, she dragged the blade down in a single, uninterrupted motion. She didn't wince, didn't flinch, didn't register in any way the sharp metal slicing through the bridge of her nose. The removed flesh rolled itself into a damp curl as she peeled. It fell to the ground with a wet splat that was far too loud for comfort. Scarlet gushes joined the streaks of dark makeup her earlier tears had dislodged. Pale bone was visible in the wound. The button tip of her nose hung on a thread from where the peeler had found its way too deep, and she had to yank it out. The blood pulled at the dangling chunk, dripping on her expensive skirt. She didn't even blink. Someone threw up. I could smell it, although the sounds of the hurling felt like they came from some other world. I was lost in the woman on the screen. I couldn't look away, and I didn't mean that my curiosity got the better of me. I was actively trying, putting so much strain into turning my head that veins on my neck began to bulge. My eyes dropped. The tiny muscles used to move them left and right screamed, threatening to tear from the force I put on them. Didn't work. I was helpless, sat on the dirty carpet, unable to stop watching as she dragged and dragged the gleaming metal. On occasion the blade would get clogged. When this happened, she would reach into the bucket, whisking the utensil around to remove the debris. Clouds of red bloomed in the water. The whole time her expression stayed unresponsive to the curls of skin piling up on the floor, the crimson wetness that consumed the lower half of her face, the open holes where her nostrils used to be. She should have screamed, but didn't. Part of me knew it was more accurate to say she couldn't. That part of me was the one that wanted to scream too. I was paralyzed and terrified. No matter how much strength of will I mustered, I couldn't turn my head away from the screen, couldn't shut my eyes, couldn't focus on anything other than the scraping of the peeler. Adrenaline and panic took over my mind. My body seemed to be getting different messages from the girl shearing off her own nose slice by slice. To my absolute disgust, I had pitched a tent. I had never felt uglier, more repulsive, in my life. I'm not a psycho, or a pervert. I'm not. All I wanted to do was not watch. The footage must have tapped into something deep, some latent human infatuation with violence in all of us. That's the only explanation, surely. It's not like a video could hijack your body. Ah, beauty, such minimalism. The piano crash was louder this time, closer to the microphone. Again, the words only last about half a second. When the trio returned, the small nub of exposed bone was gone. A triangle of open flesh lay at the center of the woman's face, her nose now in wet spirals on her lap and around her feet. The cheeks were necks. It was around the time that teeth started to be exposed that I hurled. The entrapment was so strong by this point I could no longer steal quick glances at the boys, but I could hear many of them doing the same. It was a struggle getting the vomit out. I couldn't bend over far enough due to the paralysis, and had to cough it out mouthful by burning mouthful. One of them was laying on their back when the video started. I could tell by the gargled crying that it was Hunt. I felt a tear fall down my cheek, unable to look away from the woman peeling her lower jaw down to the bone as the wails behind me coughed into drowned silence. Somebody managed to get out an almost inaudible whimper. Even though my vision was blurred with tears, I could still make out the half-skeleton in the video. I watched the screen, spitting up the occasional chunk of regurgitated kebab meat, as the blurred figure reached to her right. The woman took two objects from the silver tray that I couldn't quite make out. The orange-headed blob next to her didn't move, but even through the watery haze I could still just about make out the steady rhythm of its breath beneath the bag. For the first time in my life I was happy to be crying. The weakness in character put up a partial shield, blurring and censoring whatever I was about to see once the woman had positioned the objects next to her dripping half-face. "You will watch." The crashing came from behind, the unseen pianist slamming on the keys only a few feet away. Something forced me to blink, and I mean that in a very literal sense. It was involuntary, it wasn't a reflex, it was done on command. A command from who, or what I didn't know. My eyes slammed shut, and were quickly wrenched open again by an indescribable and overbearing impulse. All traces of tears were gone. The video swam back into focus just in time to catch the downward swing of the hammer. Exposed jawbone swing outwards, the chisel following through and digging itself in the underside of the lolling tongue. The limp muscle fell to her throat with a wet slap, hanging there behind the dangling jaw for all to see. The girl was calm when she placed the tools in her lap and reached up for the partially detached bone. Her expression didn't change when she tweaked it loose, discarding her own jaw on the floor with the skin peelings, as though she had just picked a scab. On top of everything else, the stiffness in my jeans hadn't subsided. Were my stomach not empty I would have vomited again, as much from self-disgust as the nightmare Luke's cousin had pulled me into. See what she gives for you, she removes all but the most necessary features. The unseen pianist was closer now, but what concentration I still had was focused on Luke's cousin. I could just about see him out of the corner of my eye. He was blinking. I noticed that straight away, because I couldn't unless ordered to. Laying on the floor, less than 10 inches from the screen, his young face was illuminated a ghostly blue by the light from the tablet. I couldn't pull my attention on him much, the video wouldn't allow it, but I could have sworn he managed to shoot the occasional gleeful glance at the rest of us. I was able to notice him enough to see how his wide grin didn't falter, how the joy in his adolescent eyes didn't fade as the woman on screen reached towards her own with a steel ice cream scoop. My own eyes burned with each steady flick of the woman's wrists. My eyelids howled at me, fighting a losing war to close themselves, trying even though it was hopeless to shield my mind from the sight of those bloodied once white orbs plopping to the ground. I had to cough down empty heaves when the second one rolled towards the camera, the fading pupil locked on my own. It was judging me, and I knew why. The reason I nearly choked on my own vomit wasn't just because of the footage though. The disgust was far more at my own body than at anything the video forced me to watch the girl do to hers. I could feel the wetness in my boxers the moment that first ice squelched on the floorboards. Every spasm haunted me, every muscular convulsion scarring me for life. Outside of the nightmare, before it, I had earned the half-joking nickname of Big Shagger on campus. I'd never hated myself for it before now. It wasn't until the girl started removing the skin of her brow like a face mask that the twitching stopped. My brain must have worked out that shutting my eyes wasn't going to happen. My extremities went numb, the heavy knot in my stomach became a rising lightness, an unpleasant floating sensation that nights of being blackout drunk had left me all too familiar with. The room spinned one way, my insides another. The space behind my eyes prickled. I could feel myself slipping into a blissful unconsciousness. I urged the process on. I was desperate to be out of the nightmare, and if passing out was the only way then so be it. The hand had other ideas. She obliges, she obeys, she complies. This is all for you. I could feel the clammy grip on the back of my head. The fingers worked their way through my hair, pulling and tugging to make sure I had no respite from my own depraved nature. Every time my head lolled forwards it would be wrenched back, the fog of unconsciousness fanned away again and again. I could hear sobs and whimpers from every direction. Every direction that is except where Luke's cousin sat. I could feel his grin, the cracks of his laughter flecking my wet face. The hanging smoke in the air, that stodgy scent of cheap weed, and even cheaper cigarettes, grew thicker by the second. It snaked through my mouth and nostrils, coating the inside of my lungs with heavy phlegm, that left my breathing like that of a drowning man. I gagged for a final time, blood and bile spewing onto the already vomit-sodden carpet. Perfection. The crashing in my ear canal timed itself perfectly with the moment the woman grasped her own hair and pulled. The skull came clean off, the fluid motion leaving a glistening skull caked in chunks of red and purple. The text came just as my brain had time to process the final masterpiece. The girl stood tall, proud even, with the two sweating mountains of fat either side of her, the plastic of the bags on their heads still moving with that slow in-out rhythm. The floorboards they stood on were washed with blood, a pile of fleshy curls at the woman's high heels, a single eye staring at the camera on top of it. Perfection. The words sliced through the crystal image. My dick recoiled the instant it was cut off from the shaved half-face. To my shock and self-hatred, I was wincing from the sudden removal of the eyeless stare, the tongue lolling free on a jawless neck. My head swam, joints ached, eyes burned. Yet through the taste of vomit and heaving of raw lungs only one thought crossed my mind. Perfection. As soon as I could move I didn't hesitate. I heard shouting behind me as I slammed the door, Luke and his cousin at each other, Lyle calling Hunt's name over and over, Jack screeching incomprehensible gibberish. I didn't care. I booked it from Luke's room and out into the hallway without looking back. I don't really remember the journey to my end of the building very well. I remember taking off my clothes as I ran, throwing the vomit-crusted t-shirt and soaked pants into the corridor. I left my phone, keys, wallet. I'm usually protective of the necessities, but in the wee hours of that morning they didn't matter. Nothing did, save for removing as much of what had transpired from myself as possible. People laughed when they saw me sprinting naked through the halls, but the laughter quickly turned to shrieks and startled mutters as they came close enough to see the blood and puke slathering my lips. Somehow I kicked down the door to my room. I'm not a strong guy, but desperation and adrenaline meant the old hinge gave way after 2 blows. Once sure the door was firmly barricaded by my wardrobe, I screamed my way through an hour-long shower. With the temperature up full, the water scalded my skin, at one point leaving actual blisters on my forearms, but it wasn't hot enough. Neither was the bleach I grated in with a scouring pad from the kitchen. Once drips of reddish water started to drip from the end of my shame, I gave up, collapsing into a sobbing heap on the tiles. When I woke, the shower was still on, but had long since run cold. I dragged myself into my bedroom, glad that the curtains were still closed. Once I remembered that I had lost my phone, my laptop informed me it was 17:30. I'd slept for about 13 hours. Usually I don't dream after a session, the spliffs and lines take care of that, but on the tiled floor my dreams had been vivid, more lucid than I had ever experienced. Perfection. The word rang and regurgitated over and over in real time, over half a day of formless contemplation of the meaning behind the word the revelatory film has instilled within me. Perfection. I checked Facebook, and awoke to a horde of messages. The lads had been busy whilst I slept. Luke had killed his cousin. About 10 minutes after I had gone, the argument turned into a fist fight, although from Lyle's punctuation-free 1,000-word-long message, I could tell it was less of a fight and more of a murder. Before Lyle knew what to do, Luke had grabbed his cousin's head, smashing the grinning face into a mirror over and over again until the nose was flat, and shards of glass found their way through eyelids, and into grey matter. Hunt had choked on his own vomit, but that's no surprise. After killing his cousin, Luke tried to rope Lyle and Jack into helping roll up both bodies in a duvet to dump somewhere. When Lyle refused, Luke had gone at him with a shard of glass. Jack was in no state to do anything, so Lyle grabbed him, and they both licked it. The status update at the top of my news feed let me know what happened to Luke once they'd gone. Charlotte, Luke's flatmate, was going to need therapy for a long time. Maybe forever. She was never one to shy away from details of her grievances online, and this time was no different. Her recollection of events would have been harrowing had it not been for my awakening. Upon barging through his door, to investigate strange noises, she had found Luke, naked, kneeling on 2 face-down bodies. I imagine she didn't stick around long enough to find out who they were, or she had been told not to by the police she later mentioned had arrived, but I knew. He was laughing, crying, screaming, every emotion it was possible to feel, a shrieking monster surrounded by the dead and shards of bloodied mirror. The part that would truly disturb Charlotte, the part that would give her recurring nightmares of what should have been any normal morning, was what he clenched in his hands and mouth. 3 sets of severed male genitals. Judging by her capitalized paragraph, Luke had a large wound between his legs that confirmed one of them was his own. Perfection. Flicking my eyes back to the message told me things hadn't gone much better in Jack and Lyle's flat. They lived on the 7th floor, a fact that Lyle wasn't quick enough to stop Jack exploiting. To prevent exactly what Jack had been planning, the large windows only opened a few inches. Lyle heard the glass smash, but was only able to kick the door through in time to catch the sight of Jack's ankles disappearing beyond the sill. By the time Lyle reached the window, Jack was a red crater on the concrete. A quick glance outside my curtain showed me at least 6 pairs of flashing lights. The door supervisor was talking to a police officer, pointing up at my window. I knew what I had to do, but didn't have long to do it. Perfection. Moving the barricade, interrupting my flatmates' romantic dinner, ignoring their screams as I threw the fridge in front of the door, stabbing them until they made no more noise, finding the potato peeler at the back of the cupboard. All of these I found easy. I had purpose now. I made sure to add the bed to the wardrobe when resealing my bedroom door behind me. I needed time, a resource that the hammering on the door to the flat beyond the barricade told me I didn't have. I could hear somebody shouting my name. A deep male voice, human in a way that I soon would not be. Perfection. I grasped the potato peeler in my hand. My palms were sweating, but not from nerves. It was anticipation. No, not anticipation, excitement. The same excitement I used to feel in that moment where a girl throws you down on her bed and unhooks her bra. The plastic pressed into my fingers felt realer than any woman I'd ever touched. I gazed at myself in the mirror. Bloodshot eyes, a hooked nose, lips dried out from too many cigarettes and late nights. All of it holding me back, all of it clouding my vision for so long. I didn't wince as the peeler made its first incision. I'm so glad I watched that fucking video. Perfection. Have you ever heard of Hell's Bells? Not the song, but the drug. I was sitting in my 11th grade mandatory DRAC class, which stood for Drugs Are Not Cool. Mrs. Kopic was droning on and on about psychedelic drugs, inhalants, STDs, and how if you have sex you'll get pregnant and die. I sat in the back corner of the class, smirking at a ridiculous conjecture and scrolling on my phone. I saw an advertisement on the bottom of the screen for a dark web browser. A few of my friends had been watching some guy from UK read off stories of the dark web, and whatever data mining was rampant on my phone must have picked up the audio. I remember one of the stories including a drug deal transpiring on something called Silk Road. Zach, please read off the page about Hell's Bells. Mrs. Kopic said in an annoyed tone. Like many other teachers, she knew not to bother harassing me about my phone use. I had a reputation for just getting up and leaving when they decided to challenge me. I grabbed the 16-page package she had given me at the beginning of the class and skimmed until I found the section on Hell's Bells. Hell's Bells tea is a tea brewed from the Hell's Bells plant. The plant is also known as Jimson weed and datura. It contains chemicals that both relieve pain and cause hallucinations. Medicinally, the plant can be used as a sedative and painkiller. It is abused as a recreational hallucinogenic drug by some people. I said in a bored tone to the frustrated teacher. Good job, Zach. Now, the plant is shaped like an actual bell, and the buzz of a real bell indicating the end of the class chimed. Okay class, your homework is to find a news story about someone's experience on hallucinogens that resulted in harm or misfortune. The class groaned like a horde of annoyed zombies, and we all shuffled out of the class. That day at lunch, I began Googling for my homework assignment, desperate to get it done as fast as possible, so I could relax when I got home. As my thumb shuffled through an alarming number of cases from Florida, another advertisement popped up. Deep web browser iOS, no one will know. It was as if an actual light bulb went on above my head as I downloaded the app. The rest of the day flew by, and before I knew it I was home, laying on my disheveled bed, typing in the address to the Silk Road. I took a picture of the Hell's Bells from my dank packet, and posted an ad. potent hallucinations, hell's bells. 1 Bitcoin per head, serious applicants only. I laughed as the ad posted and found some random article for my class homework. The night flew away into rounds of my new favorite MMORPG, and loud music my parents hated. Before I knew it, I was drifting off. The next day I woke to find I had an email waiting for me in my personal inbox. It was from an address that looked generic as could be, with a name that was equally generic and obviously fake. From J. Smith, hello Zach Mitchell, I want those hell's bells. I will send 1 Bitcoin as requested. Mail the package today. Thank you. VD. How the hell did you get my personal email, pal? I muttered nervously to myself. I had used a fake email when posting that ad. I thought I had been smart. My webcam was even taped up. I went to school and did my best to forget about it all, until I got to lunch. I told my best friend about the whole debacle, and he seemed entirely too excited. Dude, how are you gonna get the Bitcoin? He said, practically foaming at the mouth. Another kid came up, some weird skinny girl who no one liked, named Gabi. She spoke with a heavy lisp as she talked. This is total bull crap. 1 whole Bitcoin is like $53,000. No way someone would send you that. You're just being trolled, she said, smirking. No one asked you, Gabi. Go away, I said with a sneer. As I spoke, another email appeared. From J. Smith, another throwaway account. I said aloud to my friend. Well, read it, he said eagerly. I have made you an account with this Bitcoin trader, complimentary for you. You can redeem your payment here, I've already sent it. This is your login information. You're welcome. From VD bro, login in with it. Let's see if he really sent it. Called my friend. Gassed up with the idea of having $53,000 to my name, I eagerly logged in. To my surprise, it was there. The equivalent to $53,000. I knew I had to cash it out before this guy found out I was a fraud. As soon as I could, I ducked out of school and headed to every crypto ATM I could find, and at the end of the day I had successfully cashed $12,000. I would pretend to be sick the next day and do it all over again. Soon I would have the full amount in my hands. I knew I had to stash the money, before my loser dad found it, and spent it all on booze. I pulled down an old Monopoly game from the closet in my room, took the contents outside and burned it. I came back inside, and stashed the money in the box, and carefully replaced it in my closet. The day of walking all around my busy city wore me out, and before I knew it I was asleep. The next day I awoke to a text message from a number I had never seen before. Hello Zach, I saw you were busy yesterday. Did you send the bells? VD. My heart sank as I read the words like the epitaph on my grave. This guy was watching my every move, and got my personal phone number. I wasn't messing with a normal guy. After all, this guy did send me a massive amount of money for some crappy drugs. Surely, this must be some kind of hoax. I told my dad I was sick, and he responded by grunting and shuffling off to his beat-up truck, on his way to another day at the car plant. As he pulled away, I got on my bike and went to every ATM I could find. That day it wasn't so great, I only got $7,000. A couple ATMs were closed, and I could only go so far on my bike. As I pulled in my driveway I saw I was getting a call, and I knew I would be making a dire error if I answered. Instead, I dropped the phone in a sewer drain. The next day I awoke to the feeling of being watched. I ran to my dingy window and moved a curtain aside to see a black sedan with tinted windows outside my house. As I squinted my eyes to observe it further, the window rolled down, and a newspaper flew out. The car sped off. I got dressed and retrieved the paper only to see it read, "Where are my hell's bells?" And VD sends their regards, written in for every column. The pictures depicted rotting animals and the drug known as hell's bells. Was this a threat? I ran inside and tried to tell my dad everything. All my father said was I never liked those. Scary. Stick to shrooms. And he walked away. My jaw dropped and I went to school, desperate to get away from that sedan. The day wore on, and every time I had to work on a school computer, I would receive email after email. That was until I got to dank class with Mrs. Kopic. I sat in the corner, hoodie on, and head down. Before I knew it, the bell was chiming, and I sluggishly got to my feet to leave the class. Before I could leave, Mrs. Kopic stopped me. "What's wrong?" "Where's your phone?" she said in a stern voice. I began to cry. The day wore on, and every time I had to work on a school computer, I would receive email after email. That was until I got to dank class with Mrs. Kopic. I sat in the corner, hoodie on, and head down. Before I knew it, the bell was chiming, and I sluggishly got to my feet to leave the class. Before I could leave, Mrs. Kopic stopped me. "What's wrong? Where's your phone?" she said in a stern voice. I began to cry. Some hole keeps sending me stuff, so I threw it away. I played a prank on the dark web and this guy found me. My dad won't help, and he was outside my house. I trailed off, a snot poured out of my nose, and her arms pulled me into a hug. "I know someone who can help," she said softly, and she guided me out of the classroom. I was surprised to find myself in the computer lab with only 3 people in it, 2 nerdy guys I never bothered to learn the name of, and Gabi. I chaperone Gabi a lot, she knows quite a bit about this kind of thing, Mrs. Kopic said. I sheepishly approached Gabi and explained everything to her. She grinned when I finished talking and asking in a snarky voice, "So you want my help, I take it?" "Please, Gabi, I heard these people are killers," I said, trembling. She chuckled and demanded my login info to the website where I had redeemed my Bitcoin. "That app you used was bogus. Some hacker got your IP address, then your email, then you used this website he made up, and he used you as a foot soldier to launder his mined Bitcoin. He's going to continue to harass you until you give him the full $53,000. Wow, Zach, you were a real idiot in how you handled this," Gabi said, laughing. "I don't have it," I said, trembling. "That's it, I'm getting the police involved," Mrs. Kopic said. "No," Gabi and I both said. "That'll make it worse, Mrs. Kopic. That will escalate things," Gabi said carefully. "In fact, it's probably better you go. You're going to want deniability. You kids come get me if things get worse," she said as she left. "She's nice, but kind of useless," Gabi said to me. I laughed a little and ran my hands through my hair. "Here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to find a real seller of Hell's Bells and reroute their sale to this VD person. I'll pay for it out of my own cryptocurrency, and you'll pay me back. This hacker is calling your bluff and has you. But if you really send the drugs, he has no real play other than blackmail. Is there anything you can get blackmailed for?" she said, jabbing my side. I shook my head swiftly. "He could always just try and hurt you, but we're gonna skip town," she said with a wild look in her eyes. "What?" I said, jaw hanging agape. "That's the favor, you're going to take me out of this crappy town," she said, locking me in her gaze. "Okay, I guess we have to. It's this or get wrecked by some hacker," I said, pulling at my hair. "Good call," Gabi said, returning to her computer and typing away furiously. "Done. Now go home and pack. I'll pick you up at 2 a.m. and we'll get out of here," she said. There I was at 2 a.m., Monopoly box in one arm, duffel in the other. My father would hardly note my disappearance. Gabi pulled up in an ancient-looking truck, and I reluctantly joined her. We bounced from town to town for months, and over the course of the months, we grew close. I began to see her as less of a nuisance, and we even started to become romantically involved. That was until I woke up in the middle of the night and found her laptop open. There it was, a welcome screen greeting Gabi, saying the following in big letters that sealed my fate as the world's biggest fool. "Welcome, vicious delirium. VD." Gabi had been the one to blackmail me. It all made sense. The hacker conveniently forgot about me, because I left town. I was so stupid and naive. I heard stirring, and turned around to face Gabi sleeping soundly. I gathered everything I had, all that remained of our money, and took to the road again, without her. The messages have returned. Every time I try, and use my phone, it powers down. I know she's chasing me, tracking my every move. I don't see an escape to this, so I'm posting this in hopes someone can give me some insight on how to ditch this crazy chick. I don't know if you've ever heard of Hell's Bells, but you don't even have to do them for it to ruin your life. It had been years since we saw Jeff. Ever since he failed out of college and moved back to the USA, my wife and I had been missing him. He was the funniest, most down-to-earth person we had ever met, and those qualities are hard to find in a stuck-up city like Vienna. When the plane touched down in Miami, We were excited for both the weather and our old friend. We instantly fell into each other's arms at the airport, and it felt like no time had passed at all. It seemed like he had had a rough few years. He had spent some time in jail, watched his grandparents die, and lived in his car, doing stand-up comedy on the road. He was beaming, though, as he handed us a flyer for a show the next night. "I've been headlining shows all over the South," he stated proudly, "and I'd be honored if you guys would come to that." It seemed like he had had a rough few years. He had spent some time in jail, watched his grandparents die, and lived in his car, doing stand-up comedy on the road. He was beaming, though, as he handed us a flyer for a show the next night. "I've been headlining shows all over the South," he stated proudly, "and I'd be honored if you guys would come to this one." Of course, you probably already heard a lot of my jokes before, but you know how comedy is. Write what you know. And with that he took us back to his place. "You're going to love my girlfriend, Pate," he said. That's when the troubles started. My wife Tatiana put her heavy jacket back on. I thought it was odd at the time, but in retrospect, maybe she got chills from the name alone. As we walked into his one-bedroom apartment, he immediately yodeled, "My pizza, I'm home." A roar came from the bedroom. "Pizza." Pate came lumbering out of the room, a full 4'7", and at least 400 pounds of pure terror. Look, I'm not one to shame anyone for their appearance, but neither is my wife, and I had to literally cover her mouth to keep her from screaming. I don't know if that was out of politeness or self-preservation on my part, and I likely never will. Pate's eyes were about twice the size of normal human eyes, approaching an IM's size, and were pure obsidian black. Her grey, wispy hair stuck up out of her rock-like scalp like a troll doll that had been set on fire. Blue and purple veins twitched throughout her pale skin like worms in a Vietnamese spring roll. She had 7 fingers on each hand, but most disturbing of all were her index fingers, which were black, had at least 3 joints, and were more than twice as long as the others. Actually, that wasn't the most disturbing thing. The most disturbing thing was her swollen tongue, which lolled out of her mouth at least a few feet, well past her sagging, lactating breasts. All in all, she made the fat vampire hive lord from the original Blade movie look like a supermodel in comparison. Still, this was the girlfriend of one of my very best friends. I went in for a hug and kiss on the cheek. We're touchy people, it would be weird if I didn't. Immediately I could feel the unnatural heat radiating from her tongue, but I wasn't ready for the corpse-like frost of my lips on her cheek. Surprisingly, she smelled incredibly nice, like lilacs, old books, and dill pickles. Maybe Jeff was just into her for her smell. It was weirdly intoxicating. "We have snacks." Jeff chimed in airily as the rest of us fought to catch our breath and act normal. Even Pate, I could tell, was holding something back. Deep in her black eyes, I recognized the look of a person, doing all they could to contain some deeper emotion. "Don't let it be hunger," I kept saying to myself. "Please don't let it be hunger." Jeff pulled up a seat with beers, and a bowl of flaming hot Cheetos and said, "Have you seen Sam Morrill's new special, On the Rooftops? It's amazing." And so we settled in with a beer to watch a comedy special, just like old times. Except in old times there wasn't a 2-meter-long anteater tongue slowly working its way around the Cheetos, and an unnaturally long and skinny finger slowly, rhythmically tapping on the hardwood coffee table every time the audience laughed. At one point Pate asked if I wanted a massage. It took me a minute to understand what she was saying, what with the tongue, and everything, but the second she got up and started moving her 14 fingers towards me, I just instinctively started saying, "No." "Pate, Curtis is a married man," Jeff said. "I'm so sorry guys. We've been living that swinger lifestyle for a little minute. She can get antsy, you know." Tatiana and I exchanged a startled glance that I can only describe as suggesting multiple people are fucking that thing. Another hour passed discussing our old adventures in Austria. The time we did mushrooms and encountered a guy playing the accordion with a lifelike zebra mask. Yes, he was real, and he tried to rob us. The time we all got stuck in a broken down subway with no lights and a mariachi band. The time we went to a music festival and took so much acid that I started thinking about how to make friends with a priest. As we talked about all of our old drug war stories, I started to think that maybe I was just hallucinating the monstrosity panting directly to my left. But then I would feel the moist heat radiating from her tongue, and feel the hackles of my stomach raise like a horny cat. Occasionally, Jeff would express his love for Pate, and she would hiss back, "My pizza," and pull out one of her hairy, They need boobs for him to pet. In retrospect, I think that may have been the most disturbing part. Certainly top 3. On the way to our hotel in the rental car, it took a few Led Zeppelin songs on the late night, get the let out station before either of us could formulate a coherent sentence. She seems nice, I said. Jeff has never been shallow, and you shut the fuck up right now, Taddy said. You shut the fuck up immediately. Clearly she was just as disturbed as I was. Look, I said, maybe she's just really into extreme body modification. Like, extreme shit. Did you see that fucking thing? Tatiana exclaimed. That was not human. I've been in robotics for years, Curtis, and I can tell you with some certainty that we are decades away from prosthetic fingers that move like that. Why would you even want that? And that tongue? Gene Simmons, I interjected with a dead stare and flat effect, the universal indicator of, yes, even I know that I'm wrong. Fuck you, Curtis, there's not that much tongue in any human mouth. Not in 2 human mouths. Well, he seems happy. I said. Yo, well, guess what, Curtis, Jeff is a fucking idiot. She snapped back, you and I both know that. He's great and funny and sweet and all, but that thing will fucking eat him, and you know it. Finally ready to acknowledge reality, I took a deep breath and said, what do you think it evolved those crazy ass fingers for? Do you think it taps on little kids' windows to lure them out at night? It would explain the black eyes. I bet it has great night vision. That squat frame and hissing voice make me wonder if maybe it could be some kind of Filipino cryptid that might lure you into the woods and... Curtis, this is why I told you to shut the fuck up. Did I mention that I'm an evolutionary psychologist? So the next day we went to the Coral Castle. Look it up. It's a gigantic castle made of coral made by a schizophrenic man over 30 years. That's about the size of the Taj Mahal in Miami. And then to Jeff's headlining comedy show. We saw Pate haunting the front row, but since Jeff was seated with the other comics in the back, we had no incentive to sit with her, or, for that matter, to let her know we were there at all. As we watched her drool all over the people around her, I couldn't help but ask Taddy, do you think everyone else just doesn't see her? You know, like we do. Tatiana scoffed. Either that or they're just too polite to say anything. There's an epidemic of political correctness in your home country, my dear Gertrude, and it's going to get you all killed. I rolled my eyes. Taddy, I don't think whatever that thing is qualifies as any kind of protected class. Also, you're talking like a damn fascist again. Will you listen to yourself? Political correctness is going to get you all killed. Let me tell you what gets people killed, Taddy. When people start singling people out and turning against their own class. When people... Shush, she squealed. Those comically large black lobster eyes were focused on us, and bigger than before. It seemed the entire audience had frozen, and nothing in the comedy club moved, except for the lights on the stage and Pate's heaving tongue. Her face was exactly 180 degrees from her body, and she was glaring directly at us. Hot as it was in the theater, I could see steam coming off of her tongue. I put my hand on Tatiana's arm. I could feel every hair on it stand up, and I tried to pat it back down like an angry cat. Just as much to soothe myself as to soothe her. There was no doubt that Pate saw us as prey. The question was, what was going on in everyone else's heads? In that moment, everyone else in the packed house seemed to be mannequins, staring straight ahead. I was about to get out of my seat and kick some ass, is what I tell myself, when Jeff finally came on stage to thunderous applause, and Pate slowly faced forward, if you could call that a face. Some of his jokes were absolutely bizarre. I don't remember them exactly, but one of them was definitely about how inconvenient it is when you have to pull half-digested cats out of your girlfriend's esophagus. The audience ate it up. Part of me wanted to say, well, I guess this is just Miami. Standing. Fucking. Ovation. In that moment I knew we had to get out of there. I could feel the sweat pouring down my face, and no amount of calm breathing or metacognition could convince me it was just stress and the Miami heat. But then I saw Tatiana crying and feeling her neck. Curtis, we have to go, she said. I think I have tics. Again, Pate swiveled around to gawk at us, as if on cue. And this time, so did roughly 1/3 of the audience. All smiles. Not big, unnatural smiles, just small human, slightly amused smiles. And then they turned back around. But in its own way, that was freakier. And so we ran. And we ran to our car, which was full of tics. So we ran back to our hotel, which took an hour, but at least we could sleep. We did not sleep. The next morning I called Jeff and demanded to know what was going on with the tics. Yeah, I know it's not my best joke, but I'm working on it, he said. But how did you like the rest of the show? Do you think I'm improving? Man, why the fuck was my car full of ticks last night? That cannot be a coincidence. Also, I'm sorry, but I think your girlfriend might be a literal demon. I could hear him audibly sigh. Looking back, I may have been too forward. Man, I was so looking forward to seeing you, he said. You're like a brother to me. I would never put ticks in your car. But please do not talk about Pate in that way. Man, what the fuck kind of name is Pate? And your comedy is fine, but just please admit that it's weird as fuck that you have to pull dead cats out of her throat. Admit that and then we're on our way to being good again. It sounded like he was about to cry now. I tried to prevent this, man. I did this all for you. Just promise you won't answer your door, okay? No matter what. And he hung up. Tatiana was taking a shower, and I was trying to make coffee in the shitty American coffee maker the hotel provided for us. I was mulling over what Jeff had said when I heard something at the door that made my bones feel like they had stepped on G.I. Joes in the sand. As if something or someone was trying to eat our hotel room doorknob like hot soup. And then, the rhythmic tapping of one long finger with too many joints. Tatiana came out in a bathrobe and went to open the door. No, I shouted, it's Pate. She turned to me, blood drained from her face, and said, then this door may not be opened. I will say, I'm getting weirdly horny. I doubt Teddy is down, since I can still hear her crying, but the more I think about it, some demon tongue wrapped around my dick, while I play with some pale saggy, hairy, veiny boobs is starting to sound really nice, actually. It was always there for as long as I can remember. Even when I was a small baby, I think I saw it hiding beneath my cradle. I can't be sure about that, of course, given the earliest thing I can remember is when I was 4. I remember seeing a dark shadow open my window and crawl inside before sliding beneath my bed. The sight completely terrified me. Of course, I couldn't even muster the courage to get out of bed. I couldn't even find my voice to call out to my parents. I just huddled beneath the sheets, fully aware that there was something below where I was sleeping. When I woke up the next morning and managed to steel myself enough to take a look, there was nothing there. I told my parents, but as you'd expect, they chalked it up to my imagination. This didn't occur all the time, mind you. Weeks or even months could pass by where nothing would happen, though I was always too scared to actually try and peek beneath the bed whenever it did happen. Our house was near the woods, which was otherwise really fun, but it made me occasionally wonder just what it was that was doing this. Was there some strange lizard or forest man hiding out in the woods? I could only assume that was where that thing came from, given that was the direction the window in my bedroom faced. Now, many of you might be wondering as to why I simply didn't lock my window shut. Well, at the time I was too young to figure out how to do it, and when I finally did get the hang of it, I would almost always find that one of my parents had undone the lock at one point to let some fresh air and sunlight in. And truth be told, my room did get uncomfortably hot in the summers. And there would be periods when that monster didn't visit me at all, to the point where I even began to doubt myself as to whether or not it had existed at all. Fast forward a couple of years later, when I was 10, and had thought I had grown up out of my silly childhood fantasies of monsters. I had left the window open, and nearly nodded off when I heard a strange sound. To my utmost horror, the window began opening. The lights were off, so I couldn't make out what it was that came in, but it slid underneath my bed. Mind you, about 2 years had passed since the last time I saw that thing, so I had chalked it up to a nightmare by that point. Now, I was wide awake and upright in my bed, unsure of what to do. What if the monster grabbed my feet? Should I shout then? Before I could raise my voice, I felt a sudden chill enter my bedroom. It was as if I had just walked into an open freezer. Against the moonlight, I saw another shadow approach my window. If I had been scared before, I was nearly petrified now. I didn't know what that shadow was, but every fiber of my being was screaming at me to run, only I couldn't find it in me to even move. It was then that I heard a voice. Daniel, come and hide. It was a strange, raspy voice. It didn't even sound like something a human could make. Ah! I screamed as I felt something touch my leg. I looked down to see that the monster beneath my bed had extended a hand to grab onto me. As you can understand, I was completely startled. This had been one of my worst fears, after all, but the hand didn't pull me underneath as I expected. Instead, I just heard the same voice again. Quick, hide. I saw the shadow against my window now nearly blot out any incoming light completely, and the fact that it had grabbed my leg had snapped me out of my stupor. While I didn't like the monster under my bed, I didn't like whatever was outside even more. I crawled underneath the bed, and the monster surprisingly made room for me. "Sush," it whispered. My heart pounded loudly as I heard multiple feet hit the floor of my bedroom. Now, the cold was nearly unbearable and I began to shiver uncontrollably. But even then I didn't dare go out to look at whatever else had followed the monster underneath my bed. I could even hear its heart deep breathing as its feet began moving across the floor. By my count it'd have 6 or 8 legs. Regardless, I don't think I'd ever been as scared before in my life as I was at that moment. For what seemed like an eternity I lay there, underneath my bed, no longer even caring about the monster beside me. Eventually, the pressure relented and the temperature went back to normal. It was only when the monster beside me decided to crawl out, and nothing happened, that I did too. I was safe. For now. I never got a good look at whatever it had been that was hiding under my bed as it crawled out the window and into the woods. Needless to say, I didn't get any sleep that night, ran into my parents' bedroom, and whined until they let me sleep with them. It's been some years since that incident, and nothing of the sort happened again. As I've grown though, I've begun to appreciate certain things. Namely, the fact that that thing knew my name, and that it looked out for me at that moment. Something I heard once now sticks out to me, that there is always a bigger fish. There may be lots of monsters in the woods near my house, and some of them are worse than the others. One is frightening enough to chase another one of them to hide under my bed. There seems to be a food chain even amongst monsters. I keep my window open whenever possible now. I'm not too scared of what comes to hide under my bed, though I'm still terrified of whatever chanced it to hide there. But given that the monster under my bed did help me out, I feel like I now owe him one. And if I ever encounter that other terrifying creature, I'll at least know when I should crawl underneath the bed. So remember that when you think about the monster under your bed. It might be there for a good reason after all. And it might be worse for you if it weren't there. I should probably apologize for the title. The game isn't technically called Demonic Dice. We simply called it the Dice Game as far as I know, but that doesn't have the same ring to it. After all, I'm not entirely even sure that it's a demon we're dealing with here. It is some sort of entity that dwells in the forests of New Jersey. But it's said to have been around far before any Western settlers came here. I guess demon, though, is an accurate enough description for it. What is the Dice Game? It's a way to have a wish of yours granted. With a few limitations. Is there something in this world that you really want, that you can't get through normal means? There was certainly something like that which I wanted. I wanted it more than anything else in this world. The Dice Game is a simple enough ritual. You need to wait for a new moon, but you need to take one precaution. You must make sure that there was not a blood moon or a red moon the month before the new moon when you do this. Anyone who tried to do this on a new moon in the month immediately after a blood moon never returned alive. On such nights alone, it is free to kill anything it comes across. That's why few ever wander into the woods where it resides. As such, the area of the forest you need to go to is technically forbidden. But it isn't very well guarded and is rather vast, so it should be easy for you to slip in on a moonless night. Keep a regular 6-sided dice in your hand and start wandering around the woods. Until you hear a voice calling out to you from behind you. What you'll see when you turn seems to vary from person to person. Some people report seeing something like a goatman. Or Baphomet if you will. Others see something resembling the Mothman or Frogman. I saw something that didn't look like any of those things. I saw a massive snake the size of a man with 4 arms erupting from its torso. Its head was disfigured, and it had 2 extra pairs of eyes. At this point, you are to hold up your dice, and say what it is that you wish for. The creature will then say something, and if you agree to its terms you will roll the dice you're carrying. The way it works is that the price the thing demands is greater depending on the nature of your wish. And also how badly you want it. If you really want this thing, then the price will be higher. What it says at the beginning is what it wants. If you're lucky and your wish isn't too big, it will simply want to break a few of your bones. For a bigger wish, it might instead want to pull out some of your teeth. If you want something very badly, it might be years taken off your lifespan. Regardless, you only have two options, to agree or to run. Don't bother saying no, and just turn around, and run, and make sure to not look back if you think the terms are too steep. If you agree though, toss the die. Do not alter it in any way if you load it or cheat. The thing will know, and it will get angry. I assure you, you do not want that to happen. The number it lands on is how many of whatever it said it will take. If it lands on 4, it will break 4 of your bones, or take 4 of your teeth, or take off 4 years from your lifespan. The dice roll only determines the number of things it will take from you, though what it will take is decided earlier. There's no backing out now. If you agreed to have some bones broken, it will approach you and break them. It will pull out some teeth if that's what you agreed to. If you sacrificed years of your life, then it won't do anything. But do note that your lifespan will be that much shorter than it otherwise would have been. But you will get what you asked for in the end once it's all been done. I remember tossing the dice in my hand, and it landing on the number 5 after I had accepted what the thing wanted. It nodded and slunk back into the shadows. 3 months later, there was a blood moon. On the night of the new moon after that, the forest rangers in that area received a distress call from a certain section of the woods. I was perched somewhere far enough to see the section of the forest as they sent some rescuers to go look for me, but also hidden well enough so that no one would see me. Rescuers who I knew would never be seen again. And the next morning I'd just wander out and say that I had found my way out of the woods myself, but never saw my rescuers. Oh right, I never told you what the creature had told me before I rolled the dice. It had said 2 words: human sacrifices. I was sure that in total, at least 5 people had been sent into the woods to rescue me. I smiled as I knew I had upheld my end of the bargain, and my wish would be granted soon. My head has just been stirring and stirring. I barely sleep anymore, and most nights I am searching the internet and taking notes. My most important tool is my notebook. I usually destroy them after every interrogation. I don't hand over notes, the notes are mine. If I keep notes because they are still relevant to some other job I'm working. This won't be a job this time, no payment, no reward. I just want to find the Dark Master and hurt him. Again and again. I think I have to share this, so you can really understand the horror of it all. First, no, the girl was not the only one consumed that night. I counted at least 20 bodies, men, women and children of all ages and ethnicities laid out on tables that night. In a kind of lull. Each table was seated with 3 to 5 guests. I never got much closer than a balcony that allowed me to view the dining area below. I knew being discovered would be the end of me, so I was very in and out about the whole thing. I had planned to snatch up the girl and make a run for it. That was not to be. By day, they looked just like you and me. At that feast though, they were very different. Their faces were like those of leeches. A hole full of teeth and writhing black tongues. First they drained their victim, and then consumed them, flesh, bones, hair and all. When they would transform, their mouth and jaw would sort of roll away, a bit like a reversible sock, revealing their true face. I've seen many horror movies, but to actually see real horror unraveled my entire concept of reality. I still haven't shaken it. I had consigned myself to doing nothing. What could I do? I've already explained what I was up against. These things were everywhere, in every facet of society. Everyone was starting to notice my lack of sleep. I was barking at my wife and child over the slightest thing, and I had become aggressively prejudiced against inanimate objects. Namely my laptop, which I smashed to pieces when it spent just a little too long on the boot-up screen. It wasn't just due to my overdue visit to the land of Nod either. I really wanted to get back at these fucking things, but how do you fight an enemy that's everywhere and indistinguishable from anyone else? I saw a few faces, but every one of them had a security detail. No way I was going to get to one of them by myself. If I hadn't discovered Pat's notes, I think I would have done nothing, but I did find his notes, and this compelled me to do something. I had kept Pat's letter to his daughter and the locket. They needed someone to remember them. If I was beginning to understand their world correctly, there was no one to miss them. They only had each other and ultimately died alone. I told you, I have drank many tears, but I am not without feeling. I am one of those that numbs my pain with drink. Strong drink. A bit of Everclear and pineapple juice is just a cure I need sometimes. It wasn't strong enough though, to wash the taint of horror from my eyes. Those things shooing away at them, and to think, oh God, to think they were still alive. Still alive. They were still alive. I jumped from my chair, spilling my glass all over the desk, along with Pat's letter. Esther, my wife, rushed, making a shushing sound. I just got him to sleep on. She saw the mess I made, and her eyes shifted from agitation to concern. What happened, babe? She grabbed up a towel from the adjoining bathroom, and began dabbing at the sticky pineapple cocktail dripping from the table. Everclear, huh? Bad day. I know, because you only drink Everclear on a bad day. I stared at the floor, numb outside, but my spirit felt as if it had been beaten with hammers. A girl died. She stopped and rose up to meet my face. She leaned in, and kissed me, and placed her forehead against mine. I'm sorry, she said. I know you did everything you could to stop it. I couldn't hold the tears back when she said that. I stopped the girl from being eaten by one monster, only for another to eat her instead. Worse yet, I had allowed myself to become a weapon in Mr. Ghost's arsenal. That son of a bitch. That son of a bitch. Sad, angry tears. Very sad, very angry tears rolled down my face, and my wife could not wipe them away fast enough. I crashed to the ground, and buried my head deep in my hands and pulled at my hair. I could still hear them chewing and gnawing. Esther patted and rubbed my back in an effort to calm me. Then her pats turned to a rapid tapping as she gasped and urged me to rise. Look. Is that blood? My sense of intrigue overwhelmed my sadness, and I sat up and looked at the table. Where the whiskey met the paper, blood-red liquid was running from it and across the table. Words. See them. Esther shouted excitedly. She stood up and carefully wiped away the excess liquid. Once her excitement passed, she paused and asked, Is this for your work? I nodded, yeah. And, this is dark stuff, babe. Very, very dark stuff. I would prefer you not know, not because I want to keep a secret from you, it's just you don't want me to be plagued by nightmares. She said, handing the letter to me. She flicked up her eyebrows, and tilted her head. Then smiled. I know you. I know your heart. Thank you for understanding. I looked at the letter. Before it had a few sentences, but now it was littered with notes in blood-red ink. All right, she said, bedtime for me. Don't be long, okay? My feet are really cold tonight. Great. I laughed. Cold feet. My favorite. You know you love it. She laughed and kissed me. I love you, I said, and watched her sashay away through the door. Once she had bedded down, I grabbed a brush and touched up the rest of the letter and the envelope for good measure. Written all across the letter in this invisible ink was a treasure trove of information. He had a few addresses and phone numbers, symbols, and what I believed to have been some kind of incantation. Then there was the most important bit. Mongorgo equals Dark Master. I had the fucker's name. I'm sure he wouldn't appear in any address search, but I knew people. Knowing people can be a kind of superpower if used correctly, and I wielded my contact list like a sword when I needed to. I yawned. The Ambien I popped earlier was kicking in. I hadn't planned on finding these notes. I resigned to go warm my poor wife's feet and start ringing phones in the morning. The night was uneventful, and I slept well into the morning. It was almost noon by the time I got up. I was still a bit groggy. My wife had already gone to work and my son was at school. Hot coffee and note awaited me in the kitchen. I love you. Made coffee. I really don't deserve her. I drank my coffee and started ringing phones. My first call was to an old friend of mine with a certain intelligence agency. He was the one who had referred my services to Mr. Ghost. He might also know where Mr. Ghost could be found. I rang my friend's phone and he answered promptly. Go for David. He answered using his codename. David. Thank you for taking the time. I need a physical location for Mr. Ghost. I can trade for it. Fresh intel was currency to him. I knew a few things he might like to know about people and places and things. People sometimes try to avoid answering the question when they are being interrogated by offering up other juicy information instead. They'll snitch out everybody they work with sometimes. Like I said, I take a lot of notes. Would have done it as a favor, he said. I could almost hear his smirk. How about that yellow 9 case? London Bridge? He asked. David had been after me for that one for a while. It was some of my most valuable intel regarding a blood diamond for crack scheme in Miami. That guy told me a lot of interesting things. People talk a lot more and faster when they realize they are about to be impaled on an iron rod. Vladimir Drakul was truly a master of his craft. Tie men around a pole, seat them on a sharpened spike, and wait for them to lose their grip. Very handy when you are in a hurry to get info. Bit of a gamble though, as I learned in the Miami. He lost his grip before I could kick the spike down. Whatever, he murdered and tortured people for drug lords. Not a single tear shed. Location first, then I'll fax you the name of Toro's overboss. Good trade. David was probably salivating right now. You really know? He seemed doubtful. Oh yeah. He shouted, please. I'll tell you anything. And started naming names. I replied and then tapped the phone impatiently. I wouldn't have called you unless this was urgent. We got a deal, David. Yeah. Deal. This is hard copy only level info, so I'll meet you downtown at the Broken Spoke, the coffee place. You know it. 6 p.m. I'll be there for 10 minutes, then I'm gone and the hard copy goes with me. Yeah, I know it. I'll be there. Get me all you got on this Pat fella too. I told him all I knew of Pat and he agreed. I had some hours to kill, so I did a drive around the mansion, where that darkest of dinners had been served. The gates were closed, and 2 giant men stuffed into tiny suits were guarding the gates. Mongorgo. I'm coming for you. I drove away, casually. It wasn't time to strike yet. Mr. Ghost used me, and now I was going to use him. Undoubtedly, this Mongorgo and Mr. Ghost were not friends. There was some kind of competition in the world of monsters and they were competitors. I wasn't sure how yet, but I was going to use that to my advantage. I got up the gym for a while, to work off some of the anger I was feeling. I couldn't afford to lose my cool just yet. I had to stay focused, create a plan and follow through. I couldn't create that plan without information, though, and try as I might to stay busy. 6 p.m. seemed very far away. It did come, though, and when I pulled into the Broken Spoke, David was already waiting by his car. Prompt. You're a true professional, Mr. Alistair. David smiled and led us to a table in the back. After we were seated, he handed a menu. Opening, I saw he had slayed the documents inside. You've got good hands. I said, didn't see that at all. Part of our training. He said, I expect a fax in my office by morning. The waiter sat coffee and creamer in front of us. I didn't know it, but I would soon meet her again. You'll have it. I assured him as I gazed over the papers in front of me. Written on one of them was the address I was looking for, along with Pat's last address, list of assets, criminal record, FBI file, and the name of his daughter Asya. I feel my emotions stir once again toward deep sadness, and drank a bit of coffee to help push them down into my stomach. Do you know anyone that's an expert in the occult? Can you refer me? This Pat guy was into some seriously dark shit, and I could use some help unraveling it. Sure. I know a guy. A woman actually, I'll have her call you. He sipped from his coffee and then leaned in close and said in a low voice, that guy. Mr. Ghost. He's VIP. He has friends in very high places. I'm not surprised. I stared into my coffee a moment. Just be careful, eh? You're in dangerous waters. Very dangerous. I bobbled my head in agreement. You have no idea. We finished our coffees and I returned home to do a deep dive on the docks. Pat's address was in the kind of neighborhood you don't visit after dark. I'd intended to wait until morning to check things out there. I headed home and waited for my phone to ring. My wife and son were at a school function, a bake sale. They wouldn't be home for a couple of hours, so I made use of the kitchen table and spread the papers out. I had only been studying them for 10 minutes or so, when I heard a knock at the door. I snatched up a pistol I kept hidden in a panel behind the thermostat, and peeked through the curtains onto the porch. It was the waitress from the restaurant. "Who is it?" I asked in a neighborly voice. As she stood back from the peephole, and fixed her shirt and hair, then politely said, "I'm Sheila. I was Pat's friend. I followed you. We met at the restaurant." I opened the door, and pulled her in. I pushed her over to the couch, and held my pistol at my side. "What do you know about Pat?" I asked in a loud and unspoken threat to gleam across my eyes. I looked for any sign that she might be a monster in human guise. "You said Pat was into dark stuff. I thought, just maybe you meant my Pat. I just want to find him." She kept her eyes, now watering, fixated on the gun. She was no threat. I put it behind my back from her sight. Tell her, or let her go on with false hopes. I wasn't much for torturing the innocent. Not knowing was a torture in its own right. Not knowing if your loved ones will ever come home. I searched for softer words, but couldn't find them. "He's dead. He died. I'm sorry." She didn't sob as I expected she might. She cried without making a noise. "How?" she asked. "How did he die? Is Asya dead too?" "Asya," I repeated as if by some magic. Speaking her name would roll back all the horror. The horror remained there, like tar smeared across my mind, a permanent stain. "Yes." Asya. Sheila waited my response. She still had hope, and I had to be the one to snuff it out. I hated myself for it. She is also dead. I can't express how I started in, trying to explain how much I empathize with her, but my words were drowned out by her sobbing. "Not Asya. Not little Asya. What did he do?" She bawled and cursed Pat's name again and again. I let her have her cry. It was all she had left. Sheila eventually fell quiet and sat on my couch staring through me at the wall. "It would help me if you could tell me about Pat." I put my pistol away and poured us both a pineapple cocktail. Of Verclear and pineapple. I told her, "It will help calm your nerves." She took it and held it but did not drink. She nodded quietly to herself, and then finally focused her eyes on me. "Pat used to be a sweet guy, you know. Then he got this job driving for this rich guy. I hardly saw him after that." "Are you his girlfriend? Wife?" I asked. I reached up to my breast pocket and realized I had no notebook. I was his live-in sitter until a few weeks ago. He called me and said someone had taken Asya and to get out of the house. "Are you a cop or something like that?" she asked. "No, not a cop. I'm just looking for some payback. For Asya. For Pat." I swallowed down my cocktail and poured another as she was taking her first drink. "How did they die?" She joined me in the kitchen and marveled at my family photos. "You have a little boy. I want a little boy one day. You don't want to know. It was a bad death for both of them, though a very bad death, and Mongorgo is their killer. When I find him, he will beg for death." This seemed to please her. "Can I do him? Can I be the one that kills him? Can you take me to Pat's house? Can I have a look around?" "You didn't answer my question." Sheila held her drink to her lips and remained silent. "Sure. You can do the final deed." I lied. "Most people think they could kill their worst enemy, but you'd be surprised how many can't pull the trigger when the time comes, and that can get you killed. If you were going to hunt a killer, then you bring bona fide killers. Besides, I wouldn't expect her mind would be ready for the kind terrors that awaited me, nor would I want anyone else to be exposed to the realities of this living nightmare." "Sure. I'll give you a tour." The house was not what I expected. It was quite nice despite being in the midst of an early dystopian sprawl. A 3-bedroom, 2-bath with a basement and an adjoining 2-car garage. Pat's house was nicer than my house. I don't even have a garage. Sheila took me straight away to the garage, which was decorated with maps, notes, photographs, strings and pins. The floor and ceiling were covered in occult symbols and runes. Just as I began to ponder their meaning, my phone chimed. It was my anchor to the line. "Black one," I replied. "I am a new contact. I have a referral from David. You need an expert on the occult." The voice indicated age. "That's correct. What is your ID?" I asked, preparing my notebook. "Joan, as in Joan of Arc," she said somewhat proudly. "Remember Joan? Biscuits and gravy." "Remembered. How can I help?" Joan asked. She spoke as if someone who had just been waiting for a field day, eager to get out of the office. "I'm going to send you GPS over the E-line. Can you meet me here in a half hour?" I asked. "That shouldn't be a problem," she replied. That told me she probably worked with David at the local field office just outside town. We had nothing to do but wait it out, and having seen with my own eyes that monsters were real, I wasn't meddling with anything occult, not until Joan gave it a once-over. I warned Sheila to the very same, I wouldn't touch anything in here. I noted that there were also explosives and ammunition galore. There was also an open notebook with a list of names and ages. Some of them were crossed off, a few were circled, and others had stars. The ages ranged from 10 to 90. What the hell was he up to? I took pictures of everything. Joan arrived in just under 28 minutes. She was an older lady in her mid-50s, she dressed office casual, and she hid her face behind large eyeglasses. Joan was carrying a large doctor's bag, and she had a odd-looking device hung around her neck. She approached the door and she greeted us with an all-too-excited handshake. Show me what you got. Poltergeist. Possession. Oh. The cursed artifact. Those are always fun. She marveled at the house and added, very nice. This is far too new to be a haunting. Gotta be a cursed artifact. You think you found a deal at the Antiques Roadshow and then bam, bad luck all the time, or worms. It's in here. I pointed to the garage. I've seen occult stuff before, but nothing quite like this. She hustled into the garage, where Sheila was still carefully exploring. Here. Joan waved to Sheila and her eyes fell on the symbols. Holy this Vinkin. What exactly? I'm an interrogator, not an anthropologist. I quipped. They predate the Sumerians, they had a form of writing too. They mostly just used for bookkeeping, but then there is this. Joan explained and took the device from her neck. She went around poking it towards various objects, and it emitted a soft steady clicking sound. These are wards. Active 2 if my meter is working correctly. It's reading 0 cosmic. It never reads 0 cosmic. Joan used her free hand to thumb through a small pocket book, filled with symbols and translations. These are magic or something? Sheila asked, reading through the names in the notebook. In a sense. They are ancient scared geometries. More likely, the paint has some special properties or minerals blocking the cosmic band. Joan scraped some of the paint off the wall and into a small vial. I'm thirsty. Sheila said, anybody want anything? I'm fine. I said and Joan indicated the same. Anyway, Joan opened her book and pointed to images of statues and strange beings. There's a lot we don't know about the Vinkins, like these statues. Some people think they represent some kind of alien, god or demon. My bet is on demon. I replied, pointing to the strange runes on the floor and ceiling. Just then, we heard a scream from the kitchen. We both rushed in and saw Sheila running toward us from the back porch area, just beyond the kitchen. There's some kind of dead monster in there. She was visibly shaken. Joan and I went to the back porch, where we found a large, still open freezer, and inside was the upper torso of a monstrous creature. The head was like that of a leech. The mouth was a gaping round hole full of teeth, the tongue appeared to have a needle-like bone at the tip. A human face hung loosely from the base of its neck like some kind of flesh shooty. An organ of some time, attached to specialized muscles around its face and crown. I had seen one of these before, at the party. It's one of them. I said, this is what they are. As Joan prepared her camera, she was knocked to the ground by the force of the back door being kicked in. Two of the monsters with their teeth and tongues bared rushed through. One stuck long enough to shoot its barbed tongue into Joan's heart. I could see the blood being sucked up the tube-like tongue. The other rushed Sheila and sank all of its teeth into her face. It shook vigorously, and when it let go, she had no face. She crashed to the ground. I had finally managed to pull my pistol, a .45 caliber cross loaded with hollow points and full metal jacket. I put half a clip in one and half a clip into the other, as I backpedaled into the kitchen and the garages. Each shot that connected stunned them only a couple of seconds, but it bought me enough time to get into the garage. I was hoping they wouldn't approach the wards. My instinct was correct. They stood and snarled angrily at the doorway, at times goading me to come out. A face began to slither its way onto one of the creatures. He wore makeup that heralded back to the 80s, and he large gold rings which were pierced through his cheeks. You fucked me, man. You fucked me. Cash money deal and you fucked me. I am going to eat your fucking heart. He screamed at me. I recognized the voice. It was none other than Mr. Ghost, I presume. I reloaded my pistol and looked around the room looking for anything Pat may have left behind to help me hurt these things. The other creature covered its raging maw with the face of a woman, also painted up like an 80s rocker. No baby. She smiled coyly at me. He's got a wife. And a boy too. Let's eat them. I pulled the trigger and caught her in the right cheek. I knew it wouldn't kill her, but I knew it would hurt 6 ways to Sunday. You fucking leave them out of these, you fucking flesh-eating motherfuckers. Mr. Ghost laughed. Oh, Sandy baby. He got you good. Oh, and the word you're looking for, Mr. Alistair, is Virginia. Before he could finish, I saw a bright white flash appear behind him, and he ran, a flame out of my line of sight. Behind him was a very weak, very pale Joan who was readying another grenade of some kind. Unless you want to know what white foes taste like, you better get put of here right now, you vampire bitch. Joan warned. She was fumbling with the pin. Sandy held her hand in the large hole my pistol had left and turned toward Joan, and launched her tongue, this time into her neck. Just before Joan faded, she had managed to pull the pin loose, and a few seconds later, the entire living room was ablaze. Sandy ran after Mr. Ghost, wherever he went, and I escaped to my vehicle. I sped away home as fast as I could. Under protest, I stuffed my wife and son into the car, and took them to one of my safe houses. My gut told me Mr. Ghost would nurse himself back to health, and come for me again. I had disappeared us once before, many years ago, when a drug cartel made some threats. We lived in the safe house for almost 3 months then. I wonder how long we will be here this time. At least now, I know what I am dealing with. Fucking vampires. After this, I am going off-grid, after I speak the truth. I joined the army on my 18th birthday, a boy from a small town who was half a measure excited and half a measure terrified as the truck packed with recruits pulled up outside the gates of the compound that was to be our home for basic training. I remember it all so clearly, the moment when I piled out of the back of the truck, the sight of hot stretching as far as my eyes could see, the scowl on the face on the man who would become my tormentor and inspiration, Drill Sergeant Mallory. He was a 30-year veteran who looked and acted like he started his day sitting in a bath of scalding hot water, bringing his temper to the boil and reddening his grizzled face. His first words to me were, "I hate you." This I soon realized was nothing personal. It was just the first step in breaking us down so he could build us back up. 10 weeks later, on the day we shipped out at the end of our basic training, I stood on the parade ground and saluted him with respect and gratitude in my heart. I had no idea where I was headed for as we set off a few hours later. I suspected I was still too green, but hoped my destination would be one of the conflict zones that my country had its finger in. Not officially at war, but with boots on the ground and bristling for a fight. After a days-long hard ride we finally ground to a halt. The NCO yelled at us to get our butts out of the truck, and we were only too glad to oblige, stepping out and seeing hills. After a days-long hard ride we finally ground to a halt. The NCO yelled at us to get our butts out of the truck, and we were only too glad to oblige, stepping out and seeing hills. Not a military airport, not a waiting troopship, but a scrawny-looking set of hills that stretched to the horizon. There was no sign of civilization, just the road we had driven in on and our small group milling around. My comrades' disappointed expressions mirrored my own. I rubbed my chin and cracked a joke about ordering in pizza. No one laughed, especially the NCO, who had undergone the sense of humor removal procedure required for promotion to this elevated position. An officer appeared, wherefrom I did not see, and while we hurried to stand to attention and salute, he looked us up and down, then addressed us. "Gentlemen, welcome to your new post. I can see 2 things from your faces. That the cousins in your families are romantically entangled, and that you are not where you were expecting to be. Well, tough. This is the hand you have been dealt and your country demands that you rise to the occasion. Before I go any further I need to make something very clear. Everything you see, everything you hear, every damn thing that happens from this moment is subject to absolute deniability. And for anyone who does breathe a word of this, I guarantee you a life sentence in a military prison. There will be no trial first, no jury. Do you understand?" He looked at us. We stared back dumbfounded. The NCO repeated the question. Screamed it at us. "Do you understand?" "Yes," we finally managed to spit out. "Do you understand?" "Yes," we roared. Suitably warned, and completely ignorant, we were led by the officer towards a rock face that opened before us. "Cool," Private Wells whispered. Wells was a country boy with ears that stuck out and a skinny neck. He loved comic books about monsters, and had somehow become my best friend. As for me, my heart was beating real fast as we passed through the opening. I was pure and simple excited. I could not see the ground in front of my feet. If I had, I would not have been surprised to see that it was stamped with the words "Top Secret." Here I was, Billy from the backwaters, William Pointer JNR on my signing up papers, on the verge of discovering a cave. A big, brightly lit cave. "Cool," Wells whispered, as we stared up and around the vast area we had emerged into. The officer wheeled, faced us. "This is the reception area," he told us. "It is monitored by cameras, movement and heat detectors. At this moment in time you are in the line of fire of 24 automatic guns, one sweep of which would reduce us all to bloody gore." To a man, we tense. At the edges of this area are 3 main conduits which lead to storage areas. There are secondary conduits which lead to living quarters. You will be taken to yours now. Before then, are there any questions? I don't know why I opened my mouth, why the words, "What is being stored here?" came out, but they did. Even Wells did not want to look at me then. The officer walked up to me. If we had been from a certain northern clime, we would have been close enough to rub noses in a friendly greeting. As it was, I could feel his breath on my face as he said, "Do you want your mama to open her porch door in the morning, and find a bag of gore with your name tag tied to it?" "No sir," I replied, and lived to screw up another day. Our initial period at the facility, which was the only name we ever heard it given, were taken up with the mindless routines so beloved of armies around the world. We cleaned, we drilled, we were inspected, and in between we were inducted into our new world. I say, new world, because that is what it felt like to me. The only light was artificial and the air tasted stale. We were permanently underground. Sounds carried like the gentle rumble of thunder in the distance from the various tunnels, to wherever we were posted on guard duty. Conduit was army speak for tunnels, and as we rotated from post to post we learned the storage areas the 3 main tunnels led to were numerous and reached deep into the earth. After 2 months at the facility, I had the feeling I had still only seen a fraction of it. As for the question I had been stupid enough to ask on my first day here, I could only wonder. About twice a week a new shipment arrived packed in steel crates on the backs of lorries, which were driven to one of the storage areas, all under the watchful eye of armed guards. We speculated, of course, in our bunks, watching smoke spirals from our cigarettes drift lazily up. Private Wells' favorite theory was that the crates contained aliens who had crash-landed on this planet and the remains of their spaceships, along with radioactive monsters, possibly giant gators or car-sized cockroaches. In the humble opinion of Private William Pointer JNR, "Well, sir, I reckon the crates contain deadly viruses, hard drives containing classified data, compromising photographs of politicians, and the like. The dirty secrets no government would want to see the light of day. If I was right, there were a lot of secrets buried down here, a hell of a lot. But I believe there is no government, anywhere in the world, that does not mass-produce scandalous, illegal and downright dangerous materials as a matter of course." For us in the rank and file it did not matter at the end of the day. As long as we could stand up straight for hours on end holding a rifle and jump on command, then the world kept turning in the same old way. Or so I thought, until that nightmare day. It began like any other, far too early, with an NCO reminding us just how far down the food chain we were as we dragged ourselves out of our bunks. Whatever it had once been, our breakfast was something that had been beaten and fried into a shapeless lump. And then we were assigned posts and marched there double quick. Wells and I were among those ordered to stand guard, while a newly arrived lorry unloaded its crate in one of the storage areas. Whatever it was, the unloading crew clustered around the lorry, were taking their time. I caught sight of 1 or 2 worried looks among them. They know what's in there, I thought, and it's got them nervous. The straps on the lifter grew taut and began to haul the crate into the air. To this day, I don't know what happened. Whether the crate was not secured properly, or if there was a flaw in the material of the straps, but the crate suddenly tipped down to one side, and then fell to the ground. A heartbeat later one of the unloader boys called out, "Run." I grabbed the gawking Private Wells by his collar, and began to sprint away. We made it out of the storage area, and into a tunnel before the explosion came. Dust filled the space where we stood, and there was a moment of silence. The explosion caused by whatever was in that damn crate had been sudden and extreme. Shielding our faces as best we could with our sleeves, Wells and I moved cautiously back towards where the tunnel had opened out into the storage area, and saw that it was now completely blocked by fallen earth. I had the sickening feeling that, beyond this blockage, the storage area was buried under fallen earth, the storage area and the rest of poor souls who had been in there. I became aware of a siren. It seemed very far away, and that Wells was saying something to me, but I could not make out what it was because of the ringing in my ears. He held up one hand and made the universal sign asking if I was okay. I nodded, then coughed up dust. It must have been less than a minute later that we were joined by other soldiers, among them an officer. The expression on his face confirmed my worst fears. A tragedy had happened here, a terrible accident. I thanked my lucky stars I had survived, and tried to hear what was being shouted. My hearing was still affected, and I was beginning to shake. Delayed shock, I guessed. Around me, other men were acting. They were digging at the solid wall formed by the fresh fallen earth with their bare hands and calling out, if anyone could hear them. I thought it would be a miracle, if anyone had survived, but kept this to myself, and told myself to get a grip. I stepped forward, and began to tear away lumps of earth. I had barely got started when an order was yelled to move away. A digger truck trundled into sight behind us and began to advance on the wall of fallen earth. We stood and watched, and there was more than one bowed head, one pair of hands clasped together. Then there was a crackling sound. I turned to see the officer listening to his radio intently. He nodded. "We need to pull out, men," he said, then walked alongside the truck and relayed the order to the driver, who looked frustrated but did not argue. None of us did. We followed our orders. Without question, I should be able to say as a good Solider, but whatever flaw in me that it made me ask what was stored here showed again. "Why are we pulling out, sir?" I asked. This time I was not given a dressing down. The officer looked at me, and I could see the concern in his eyes as he replied, "There have been secondary collapses, son. There are chemical substances leaking into the site of the explosion, so we need to leave. But don't worry, there are troops on the way with hazmat equipment." And even as he said this, soldiers wearing the bulky safety suits rushed past us, towards the wall of earth. His radio crackled again and he walked on as he answered it. I fell into step alongside Wells. He was shaking his head. "Sheep Billy," he said. "Secret chemicals and dead bodies. You know what that adds up to?" "No," I said. "Sheep Billy," he went on, "we got ourselves a recipe for disaster." Wells was my friend and a good person, but his obsession with the things that existed in the pages of his comic books had got the better of him, I thought, until I heard the first scream. I froze. It was not the sound of a man in shock or pain. It was a cry of terror. Wells meanwhile was on the move. His rifle raised in front of him, he ran towards where the scream had come from. Back to the wall of earth. Reluctantly, I followed. We were met by a chaotic scene. A half-dozen soldiers in hazmat suits were standing staring in apparent shock at one of their comrades. His face was pressed against the wall of earth. It was like he was being held there. "What happened?" I shouted at one of the suited soldiers. His voice was muffled beneath his headgear, but I thought I heard him say, "It reached out from the dirt, grabbed hold of him," which made no sense to me. Wells meanwhile had continued to advance, until he was close enough to tap the man pressed against the wall of earth on the shoulder. When he did, the man began to shake, then flew backwards at pace. He landed on his back, and I looked down with horror where his headgear was torn open. At the bloodied site where his face should have been. His flesh was torn away, almost as if it had been bitten off. "Billy, watch out," Wells cried. I looked up, saw the hands reaching out, and the face protruding from the wall of earth. Blood dripped from its mouth. "What the hell?" I spluttered and could only stand there gripped by fear, as the thing struggled free of the wall of earth, to stand there, swing, until it bared its teeth and with shocking speed threw itself at Wells. A volley of bullets exploded from Wells' gun, tearing into the thing's head, until it collapsed onto its knees, then fell forwards. I gasped for breath that would not come and for the first time realized the thing was wearing a soldier's uniform, the same as mine. The same as Wells, who spat onto the ground and whispered, "Sheet. Put the rifle down." Someone yelled from behind us. I turned. It was the officer, flanked by soldiers, all of whom were aiming their weapons at Wells. "No," I said. "It was attacking him." "Stand down, son," the officer said. "I think you need to listen to my friend." This was from Wells. His attention was focused on the wall of earth from which the thing had emerged, from which more hands were now appearing, fighting through the earth, and within seconds 3 more men stepped out into the open. They too wore a uniform, and I recognized all 3 as men from our unit. Men who had surely died in the collapse caused by the explosion. Men who were clearly no longer human. Their faces were twisted with rage, and a low growling sound drifted from their mouths. And they were advancing on us. Wells raised his gun once more, ready to fire. "Lower your weapon," the officer said. He sounded unsure, scared. Wells shouted back, "Better you give the order to open fire on me, than I let one of these dead critters get their teeth into me." Dead, and moving, with anger burning in their eyes. I knew what I had to do. I turned and aimed my own weapon at the officer. "Sir, we have a common enemy here. Those things are no longer our comrades, they are monsters and we need to take them out." Ice-cold sweat trickled down my face as I spoke. The rifle shook in my hands. The officer hesitated. Moments that cost my friend his life, as Wells delayed opening fire until it was too late. He took out one of the things, a second dug its teeth into his shoulder, the third into his throat, and he fell to the ground with both of them on top of him. I ran to him and battered at the thing's heads with the butt of my rifle. The officer finally ordered, "Help him. Get those things off him." And I was joined by the rest of the soldiers. Within moments the heads of the dead were reduced to pulp and their twitching bodies dragged away. I knelt over Wells. He looked up at me. Tears streamed down his face, mingling with his blood. I could see the bone beneath where his flesh had been bitten away. He tried to speak. "I'm here," I said. "Help's on the way." I glanced back at the officer, who was talking into his radio. Wells tried to speak again. I supported the back of his head with my hand, moved closer so I could hear. "Put in a bullet in my brain, Billy," he said. "Please do it. If you don't, I will become one of them." "I can't," I sobbed. "I'm sorry." I looked into his eyes as he died, as he fell still. I felt a hand on my shoulder. "We will look after him." It was the officer. I held Wells close to my chest. "No," I said. Then two soldiers took my arms and pulled me away. I struggled but could not resist. They held me down as more soldiers descended on Wells and started to strap together his ankles and his wrists, gagged his mouth. "He's dead, you bastards," I shouted. "Leave him alone." They ignored me, lifted Wells' body. A sudden spasm passed through it and it began to writhe. I began to weep and watched as the soldiers carried the struggling corpse away. I am crying now as I recount this. I should have done as Wells asked. Placed my gun against his head and pulled the trigger. I have thought about this constantly for the last 2 years. While I was being debriefed and in the time I spent in a secure medical facility following a nervous breakdown and after I was discharged. There is a tunnel that opens out into an area deep underground, where a crate holds imprisoned a monster that is dead and will never be at peace. A monster that was once a man I called my friend.